The first time I met Alyssa Harrington, she was stumbling out of a rooftop bar at 2 a.m., heels in one hand, a champagne bottle in the other, shouting something about networking being a lifestyle, not a job. I wasn't supposed to see that. I was the company's senior product architect, the quiet guy who lived inside technical roadmaps and 3-year strategies. She was the CEO's daughter, newly hired, freshly overconfident, and catastrophically underqualified. Our worlds weren't meant to collide. But fate has a sick sense of humor. The hook came a week later. I received a company-wide memo sent at 1 a.m. from her, with my name misspelled. Subject line, termination notice, immediate. Her reason? I heard you skipped my welcome party. That shows a lack of team spirit. I stared at the email, stunned. A year of building the company's core platform, a patent pending in my name, and hundreds of hours leading development through the acquisition phase, and I was fired because I didn't attend a party where people were taking tequila shots off printer paper. By noon, security escorted me out like a criminal. Alyssa smirked as I passed her desk. "This is business," she said. "No hard feelings." Oh, there were hard feelings. Not the emotional kind, the strategic kind. Because Alyssa had accidentally fired the one person who knew exactly how her father's company really worked. And what was quietly about to break. The next morning, instead of despair, I felt something else, freedom, mixed with a spark of opportunity one hadn't felt in years. See, I'd been privately developing a platform, an adaptive analytics engine, initially meant for internal use at Harrington Dynamics. The board never listened, and the CEO always pushed it aside as too complex. But I knew what it could be worth. Suddenly unemployed and newly motivated, I reached out to an investor I had met during a supply chain pilot project years earlier, someone who did believe in the idea. Within 2 hours, he wired the first $600,000. Within 2 weeks, we incorporated. Within 3 months, we had a functioning prototype. And exactly 6 months after Alyssa fired me for not vibing with company culture, our platform secured its first major government contract. The numbers that followed didn't seem real. Valuation, $600 million contracts pending, $1.3 billion IPO forecast, $180 million for me alone. That was enough satisfaction for most people. Not me. Because life had one more twist waiting. Alyssa's father retired unexpectedly after a board disagreement. The seat was vacant. My investors insisted I take it, symbolic, they said. Strategic, they said. But the moment I stepped back into the skyscraper I'd once been thrown out of, I felt the atmosphere shift. Employees whispered. Directors straightened up. Executives saw their replacements in my shadow. Then I saw her. Alyssa, sitting at the end of the long mahogany table, now head of culture and engagement, a title invented solely to keep her employed. She froze when she recognized me. No, she whispered. No way. I sat at the head of the table, her father's seat, and the boardroom doors clicked shut behind me. As of today, I said calmly, our company's emerging. I'm assuming operational control effective immediately. Her mouth fell open. She looked like she might faint. What about me? She stammered. I opened a file bearing her name. My team had documented everything, missed meetings, budget misuse, ghost projects, and that infamous rooftop party incident. Alyssa, I said, this is business. No hard feelings. Her face turned white. I slid the termination packet across the table. Effective immediately. For once, she had nothing to say. The IPO launched that winter, one of the biggest of the decade. Reporters buzzed, shareholders cheered, and the bell rang louder than anything I'd ever heard. Cameras flashed as I stood on the balcony, signing the final documents confirming my $180 million stake. And somewhere in the crowd below, I spotted Alyssa, staring up at the stage, expression hollow. She had fired me for missing her party. That single act turned out to be the most profitable mistake of my life. Revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, precise, and beautifully professional. And best of all, I never had to attend her party. Alyssa didn't disappear after her firing, not completely. People like her never vanish. They linger in the corners of corporate ecosystems, orbiting the places where their privilege used to protect them. For months after the IPO, I would occasionally hear her name carried through the grapevine of industry gossip. She's trying to get hired at Vertura. She applied to 3 startups but bombed the interviews. She's thinking of launching her own wellness brand. But nothing stuck. Connections could get her into the room, yes, but competency had a way of kicking her right back out. Meanwhile, our company, my company, was rising like a meteor through every market segment we touched. The adaptive analytics engine kept proving itself indispensable: predictive inventory for defense contracts, logistics optimization for global shipping, automated risk assessment for financial institutions. Every sector we entered, we dominated. But the real shock came during the annual Global Innovation Summit. I was invited as keynote speaker. Alyssa was working the event. Not as an attendee. As a brand liaison for a small startup that had partnered with the conference. She was handing out tote bags. When she saw me on the stage screen, her hand froze in midair. The person in front of her had to tap her shoulder just to get the bag. She didn't even blink as I began speaking. I didn't take pleasure in humiliating her, not the petty kind. My revenge had already been served in the most elegant way possible: success. But seeing the collision of our paths, how a single impulsive act of hers had shifted both our destinies, felt surreal. After my speech, I walked off stage into a corridor where only VIP guests were allowed. The director of the summit was beside me, talking about partnership expansions, when I heard hurried footsteps behind us. "Wait," a voice called. "Alyssa." She looked different, less polished, less inflated with confidence. Almost grounded. There was no smirk, no entitlement. Just the raw sting of someone who'd finally run out of shortcuts. "I need to say something," she said quietly. I dismissed the director with a nod. Alyssa took a shaky breath. "I'm sorry," she said. "For firing you like that. For everything." I didn't respond. I let her continue. "You were the best thing that company had." I didn't understand that. I didn't understand anything. I studied her. Not with anger, just clarity. "It wasn't personal," she added. "I was stupid. And scared." I finally spoke. "Alyssa, I moved on. You should too." Her eyes glistened, not with tears but with something heavier: realization. "I wish I had your discipline," she said softly. "Your vision." For the first time since I'd known her, she sounded sincere. But sincerity doesn't erase consequences. Nor does it rewrite history. "I hope you find your place," I said, stepping past her. She nodded, understanding that I wasn't the same man she had carelessly dismissed. Her choices had carved a canyon between us, one she could acknowledge but never cross. 6 months later, our company hit a $2.7 billion valuation. A year later, I was named CEO of the Year. And the story of the fired engineer who built an empire became a case study at business schools across the country. Alyssa faded from headlines, from gossip, from relevance. But occasionally, very rarely, I saw her name pop up on LinkedIn. New job titles. Short tenures. A slow, winding path toward responsibility. Maybe she would get there one day. Maybe not. Either way, my journey had moved far beyond her shadow. And the revenge? It wasn't her downfall. It wasn't the IPO windfall. It wasn't the boardroom moment when she realized I was now the boss. The true revenge was this: she fired me for skipping a party. That decision built an empire and put me on top of the world she once believed she owned. Alyssa's apology at the Innovation Summit should have been the end of our intersection, but life has a habit of circling back in ways that feel almost scripted. 3 months after the summit, while my company was preparing to enter the European market, a message appeared in my inbox. It wasn't from Alyssa, it was from a board member at Harrington Dynamics, her father's old company. The subject line was short: "We need to talk." I almost ignored it. I had no interest in revisiting the ruins of the place that once tossed me out like trash. But curiosity won. We met at a private club downtown. The board member looked exhausted, thinner, older, like someone who'd aged 10 years in the last one. "Things are bad," he said. "Worse than anyone knows." I raised an eyebrow. "That's not my concern anymore." "I know. But it involves her." Ah. There it was. He explained that Harrington Dynamics had declined rapidly after the merger. Their culture collapsed. Their projects stalled. Their best people left. And Alyssa, after losing her job with the startup she'd been working for, had pleaded with the Harrington board to take her back. They gave her an entry-level operations role, hoping she'd mature. She hadn't. And now she'd stepped into something potentially destructive, an internal audit that uncovered irregularities predating even her own tenure. Legal risks. Federal risks. She was in over her head. And she'd asked the board to reach out to me. "Why me?" I asked. She said, "You're the only one who ever told her the truth." I leaned back in my chair, silent. Of all the ironies life had thrown at me, this was the strangest, being asked to help the woman whose impulsive firing had launched my multi-million-dollar career. But I wasn't moved by emotion. I was moved by strategy. If the audit exposed fraud tied to the merger, fraud I had unknowingly inherited, it could entangle my company as well. This wasn't about her. It was about protecting what I had built. "Fine," I said. "Set up a meeting." When Alyssa walked into the conference room the next morning, she didn't look like the entitled princess I once knew. She looked human, tired, nervous, humbled by the weight of a world she wasn't built to carry. She sat across from me, hands trembling. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. I didn't waste time. "Show me the audit." She slid a folder across the table. Page after page detailed misallocated funds, falsified performance numbers, and contract inconsistencies that predated both her and me. But the merger meant my company inherited partial liability if this blew up. It wasn't just their problem anymore, it was mine. "You did the right thing reporting this," I said. She looked shocked to hear any acknowledgement from me. I don't want to ruin your company. Not after everything you built. I already messed up your life once." The vulnerability in her voice was unfamiliar. She wasn't playing the victim. She was accepting it. I closed the folder. "We'll fix this. But I'm taking control of the investigation." Relief washed over her so visibly that she nearly collapsed in her seat. "I'm sorry," she said again. Truly. For the first time, I believed her. The next 6 weeks were a whirlwind of legal meetings, forensic accounting, and strategic maneuvering. I worked closely with regulators to separate our operations from Harrington's mess. My team built airtight documentation proving we were clean. We succeeded. My company was fully cleared. Harrington Dynamics, however, wasn't. And that meant Alyssa's fate was out of my hands. The board fired her, this time for reasons that actually mattered. She didn't fight it. She simply packed her things and left quietly. Before leaving the building for the last time, she sent me one final message: "Thank you for helping me even when I didn't deserve it. You showed me what real leadership looks like. I hope one day I become someone who deserves respect, not just expects it." I didn't reply. Some stories don't need epilogues. A year later, my company crossed a $5 billion valuation. At the anniversary gala, a journalist asked me what the secret to my success had been. I smiled. "Bad decisions," I said. "Just not mine." Because sometimes, life's greatest victories come from the strangest places, including the moment a spoiled CEO's daughter fired me for skipping her party, setting in motion the chain of events that turned me into her boss, and then into something even greater. Alyssa disappeared from the corporate landscape after her second firing, and for a while, I thought that chapter had finally closed. But success has a strange way of dragging old ghosts back into the light. 6 months later, right when we were preparing to ring the bell for our secondary offering on the exchange, my assistant walked into my office with a strange look. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "She says it's important." When the door opened, I almost didn't recognize her. Alyssa wasn't dressed like a corporate heir or a desperate job seeker. She wore jeans, a simple blouse, and no makeup. The glossed-over confidence she once wore like armor was gone. What stood before me wasn't the woman who had fired me in a flash of arrogance, it was someone stripped of the identity she'd borrowed her whole life. She held a folder. Not trembling this time, steady. "Before you say anything," she said, "I'm not here to ask for help. I'm here because I owe you something." I gestured for her to sit, curious despite myself. She placed the folder on my desk. "I've been working with a consulting group that helps analyze corporate culture failures," she said. "Small firm. Nothing glamorous. But I took it seriously." She pushed the folder toward me. "That's a report I wrote. A full breakdown of what went wrong at Harrington Dynamics, culturally, structurally, ethically. I submitted it to them, but I wanted you to have a copy. You deserve to know the truth behind what happened to your department, and how much damage was hidden behind the scenes." I opened it out of courtesy, expecting a half-baked attempt at closure. But I was wrong. It was meticulous. Detailed. Honest. Painfully honest. Page after page described the toxic ecosystem built long before her involvement: favoritism, unchecked authority, financial misdirection, inherited rot. She outlined how she herself had fed into it, how entitlement blinded her, how she mistook power for competence. It was a confession. A dangerous one. One that could have legal repercussions if mishandled. "You didn't have to do this," I said quietly. "Yes," she replied. "I did. You built something real. And I almost derailed it without even realizing how. I can't change who I was, but I can stop pretending that ignorance excuses anything." She stood. "Anne, I wanted you to know I'm trying. Not to fix the past, but to become someone who would never repeat it." For a long moment, we just sat in the silence created by two very different evolutions, hers born from collapse, mine from perseverance. "What are you doing now?" I finally asked. She smiled faintly. "A fellowship in organizational ethics. I'm rebuilding." Slowly. I nodded. Not as a boss. Not as a rival. But as someone who understood what it took to climb from ruins. She turned toward the door, then paused. "Thank you," she said. "For the day you didn't humiliate me. For the day you didn't refuse the audit meeting. For handling the situation with dignity I didn't deserve." And then she left, not dramatically, not shattered, not prideful. Just transformed. A year later, her report became a cornerstone case study in 2 business schools. Professors praised its clarity. Students debated its insights. Consulting firms referenced it in lectures on leadership failure. And her name, Alyssa Harrington, appeared quietly at the bottom of the first page. Not as a disgraced nepotism hire. Not as the spoiled daughter of a CEO. But as the author of a brutally honest analysis of corporate collapse. She never reached out again. She didn't need to. Some stories don't end in reunion, vengeance, romance, or redemption arcs wrapped in ribbons. Some end simply with 2 people walking in different directions, one rising, one rebuilding, both shaped forever by a moment of arrogance that launched an empire. And me? I rang the bell at the stock exchange that year, watching our valuation climb past $7.3 billion. As the confetti fell and reporters shouted questions, I thought of the night she fired me for skipping a party. How fragile success can be. How strange destiny is. How a single careless decision can rewrite the future. Not all revenge is loud. Sometimes it is simply this: becoming everything they never imagined you could be, while they become everything they never thought they would have to face. The months after the stock exchange celebration marked the most unexpected phase of my life, not because of the success, but because of what success inevitably attracts: scrutiny, imitation, and enemies disguised as admirers. The story of the executive who rose after being fired by a CEO's daughter circulated across business journals, blogs, podcasts. People romanticized it. They made it sound cinematic, like a perfect arc of triumph. But reality isn't cinematic. Reality is complex, political, and always watching. And Harrington Dynamics, now bleeding, leaderless, and desperate, was watching me. It began with an email from their surviving board members. Not a threat. Not a lawsuit. A proposal. They wanted me, the man their own nepotistic protege had discarded, to step in as interim chairman and help salvage what remained of the company. At first, I assumed it was a joke. But no, this was real. Their situation was catastrophic. Black small square stock down 83%, black small square institutional investors fleeing, black small square contracts failing, black small square debt climbing, black small square no leadership strong enough to stabilize anything. They didn't need a CEO. They needed a surgeon. And I was the only one with the credibility, the track record, and the clean distance from the scandal. You have no obligation to help us, the board member said in a meeting. But if Harrington collapses, hundreds of employees will lose their jobs. Employees who had once stood across from me in crowded break rooms, passing me coffee, chatting about deadlines, unaware of the storm coming. I remembered them. And despite everything, I wasn't built to walk away from people who didn't deserve to burn. Fine, I said. I'll take control. But on my terms. Walking into the old headquarters again felt oddly surreal. A different badge. A different title. A different purpose. Some employees recognized me, some with guilt, some with relief, some with gratitude they didn't voice out loud. The office that once ignored my contributions now fell silent when I entered. The weight of crisis hung in the air like static. I assembled a war room, legal, financial, operational, cultural. Every broken piece of the company was laid bare on the table. And we attacked it like a battlefield. We renegotiated contracts. Cut toxic middle management. Rebuilt reporting structures. Implemented accountability systems. Repaired relationships with clients who had written Harrington off. I didn't rebuild the company for Alyssa. I rebuilt it for the people who had shown up day after day, loyal to a structure that had failed them. And after 6 months of brutal, unglamorous work, the numbers shifted. Not dramatically, just enough to show a pulse. Harrington Dynamics was alive again. Not healed. Not thriving. But breathing. That was enough. The board offered me the permanent chairmanship. A 7-figure salary. Control. Influence. Most people would kill for that offer. But I didn't take it. Because I already had a company, one I built from ashes. One I cared about. One that wasn't poisoned by legacy egos and inherited dysfunction. So I declined. I'm not here to own your company, I said. I was here to give it a second chance. What you do with that chance is up to you. They tried to convince me. I didn't budge. Some victories come from knowing when to leave. The night I stepped out of the building for the last time, the wind was cold, the city buzzing with life, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years: closure. Not the dramatic kind. Not the revenge-fueled kind. A quieter version, like finishing a book you once hated but now understand. As I walked toward my car, I received one last message. From an unknown number: I heard you saved the company. Thank you for doing what I couldn't. I didn't reply. She didn't expect me to. Some chapters close without conversation. Some scars don't need reopening. Some stories end when everyone has finally become who they were meant to be. And me? I returned to my company, the empire I built from the ashes of arrogance and dismissal, stronger, sharper, and wiser. The truth is, I didn't rise because she fired me. I rose because when someone pushed me off a cliff, I learned how to build wings on the way down. The months after I left Harrington Dynamics for the second, and final, time were the calmest I'd experienced in years. But calm never lasts long when you've become a symbol, a threat, and a headline. The markets remembered me. Competitors remembered me. And people with power, real power, began circling like sharks sensing opportunity. At first, I dismissed the attention. Our company's IPO had already cemented our place in the industry, and I was more focused on expanding our AI infrastructure division. We secured partnerships with 3 global firms, doubled our staff, opened 2 new offices. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was building forward, not running from the past. Then, one morning, my legal chief stormed into my office holding a stack of documents. "You need to see this." I scanned the first page and felt my stomach tighten. A major conglomerate, one notorious for acquiring companies through aggressive pressure, had begun quietly buying our stock. Not enough to trigger alarms. Just enough to creep, inch by inch, toward influence. A hostile takeover. Subtle, slow, deliberate. Why us? Why now? Then the connection hit me like a slap. The conglomerate's COO was none other than Victor Langley, a former Harrington board member. A man who had bet heavily on the merger that Alyssa's audit had exposed. A man who lost millions because I helped regulators clean house. A man who wanted payback. Not the petty kind. Not the impulsive kind. The sophisticated, boardroom kind that ruins legacies and swallows empires. I leaned back in my chair, the pieces aligning sharply in my mind. This wasn't business. This was retaliation. And he was using my own success as the battlefield. We moved fast, faster than Victor expected. I assembled an emergency board meeting. Pulled in our largest institutional investors. Presented the data with cold precision. "They're positioning themselves," I said. "If we don't counter now, we'll be answering to someone who wants this company dismantled." One board member asked, "Can we outbuy them?" "No," I replied. "But we can outmaneuver them." In the world of corporate warfare, money wins battles. But strategy wins wars. I launched a 3-part defense, a shareholder rights plan, the classic poison pill. A strategic partnership with an ally they wouldn't dare antagonize. A counter by acquisition targeting a company Victor's conglomerate depended on. And then, there was the wild card. A report. A culturally damning, academically recognized, meticulously researched report. Alyssa's report. If Victor attempted a hostile move, its details, especially the sections tying him to earlier mismanagement, would become very public in a heartbeat. And he knew it. I didn't want to use the report. In fact, I hoped I never would. But leverage is leverage. So I called him myself. Victor, I said as soon as he picked up, you're smarter than this. Pull back. He laughed. You think you can intimidate me by pretending you have leverage? I don't need to pretend. Silence. A long one. He knew exactly what I meant. That little document, he finally said. You wouldn't dare. Try me. Another pause, shorter, sharper. And then he hung up. 2 hours later, the conglomerate withdrew all purchase attempts. Their stock dropped 4 points in one afternoon. Our boardroom erupted into applause. I didn't join in. Victory sometimes tastes like metal, sharp, cold, necessary. A week later, I received a short, unexpected email. I heard what happened. I'm glad the report helped. Even if that wasn't why I wrote it. It wasn't pride. It wasn't apology. It wasn't reconciliation. It was acknowledgement, quiet, measured, earned. I sent only 2 words back, thank you. Because despite everything, despite the chaos, the downfall, the rebuilding, her moment of honesty had become the very weapon that saved my company. Funny, isn't it? The CEO's daughter who once fired me for skipping her party wrote the document that protected my $7.3 billion empire from being devoured by someone far more dangerous. Life isn't poetic. Life is strategic. And the higher you climb, the more you learn the same truth. Sometimes your greatest threats come from people with power. Sometimes your greatest protection comes from people who lost it. And sometimes your greatest victories begin on the worst day of your life. The full storm passed months later, quietly, imperceptibly, like a mountain settling after an avalanche. We had survived the hostile takeover attempt, secured new global partnerships, doubled our valuation, and strengthened our internal culture so deeply that even our investors called it bulletproof. But success, real success, isn't a moment. It's the aftermath, the part where you realize what the fight revealed about you. And for the first time in years, I found myself standing in the corner office of a skyline I now owned a piece of, looking out at a city that once ignored me, once underestimated me, once watched me fall. Now it watched me build. The board wanted a victory tour. Investors wanted a media release. Analysts wanted quotes. But I didn't want applause. My biggest win wasn't the defense of my company, it was the transformation that had happened around me, without fanfare, without noise. I had built something ethical in an industry famous for its predators. I had protected employees who trusted me long before I had a title. I had made decisions I could live with even when they weren't easy. And somewhere, in another corner of the world, someone else was rebuilding too. 2 months after the attempted takeover failed, I received a small envelope. No name on it. No sender. Inside was a single card. I defended your legacy without ever thinking I'd have one of my own. Thank you for giving both a chance. No drama. No plea. No request. Just closure, cleaner than I ever expected. I placed the card in my desk drawer. Not as a trophy, not as a reminder of revenge, but as a marker of how unpredictable evolution can be. The CEO's daughter who fired me for skipping a party accidentally became the author of the report that protected my empire. The firing that was supposed to ruin me became the spark that built a multi-billion-dollar company. The humiliation that was meant to shrink me became the catalyst that expanded my entire life. Revenge? No. This was something far larger. It was proof that growth is the sharpest blade, that integrity is the strongest armor, and that becoming the person they never expected is the sweetest, cleanest comeback of all. And as I watched the sun set over the glass towers, my towers, I realized something final, something freeing. I hadn't just outrun my past. I had rewritten my future so completely that the people who once underestimated me could no longer recognize the altitude I stood on. Some victories echo. Mine roared.